our efforts in terms of land, restitution, reform, restoration have went zilt.
Zero.
Zero.
No achievement.
No achievement at all. People have abused democracy to a point where they have become irresponsible. The only power that the working class seemingly may have is the right to vote. Other than that, I don't see any other thing, because I have witnessed this country from 1994 to date. When you look at the material conditions and look actually what has actually changed, there's little that has changed. The presidency has a role to play in the traditional era, because you know that the kings are certified by the presidency. They are not anointed.
Yes, of course.
They are not anointed by the president.
King David Studio podcast.
I have a Secretary General of Contralesa, Zolani Mkiva, in the studio, someone I've known for a while. And when I say a while, I'm talking over 20 years. when we were both still young
Very
men.
young. We were still at university, so to say.
You know what I
or
mean?
Just came out of university.
Exactly. Ukrent.
No, in the sharp. Good to see you after a long time, and allow me to say Happy New Year to you and wish you all the best.
Thank you so much.
And
I
2025.
Yes, and I do the same. I wish you the best for you and the family and for your organization as well.
Thank you.
I remember you were Nelson Mandela's inauguration. There's a Mbongi Esizwe who's called to the stage.
Yes.
Some of us were not exposed to that type of Ugbong. What is it? Ugbong. Exactly.
Yes,
I said
yes,
it right. We're not exposed to it before that moment. And I imagine in your Xhosa culture, that's very common. It's nothing out of the ordinary.
Absolutely.
To us, we had never seen that.
Yes. Yes.
When you go back to that time in your life, how do you even get that type of call-up, Ndoda? How do you get to be the one that they call and say, come and do this?
Well, first and foremost, the gift of Ukubonga is a divine calling. So it's more than just being called up. It's more about the authoritative command of the ancestors when they give you this gift. That it's spontaneous in the majority of cases.
Wow.
So prior to the 10th of May, 1994, the inauguration of the first president of a democratic South Africa, as a young student at high school, at university, I always rock up in these functions, which were part of the dramatic changes leading to the new South Africa or the new dispensation.
It was in the 90s.
In the 90s.
In the early 90s.
In the early 90s.
Yes.
So the inauguration happens from a culmination of many other activities prior to that. The release of Mandela, the welcome of Mandela, as well as prior to him, the welcoming of Abobaba Walter Sisulu, Weltini Mkwai, and many others. So I featured in those events. So at the university, where also many other people were actually surprised when I would come up and sing, these praise songs in the graduation ceremonies. They were also introduced
to this
in the same way I introduced it to many South Africans at the inauguration, when all eyes were locked in, into the television sets. So, yeah.
A moment like that, I imagine in other cultures, you do find someone in the family who, Kasitswana, Kasipedi, and so forth, it's called Ireto, Areta, all of that. And you find those type of things. But for it to be seen on such a global scale was very different, was a different perspective, I guess, in that regard.
Absolutely. It was a singular honor and a privilege for me to be on that stage at a time that billions of people across the world were like looking at this miracle of South Africa, as they called it. So I was right at the center of it as the president was about to deliver the keynote address of the day. Or to take, the oath of office. And I was there in this historic moment, unprecedented. Never thought that we would witness it in our lifetime. And there I was as a young person who comes from the margins of society to come and mainstream one of the most ancient tradition of our people. As you say, it actually resonates with all our cultural communities in South Africa in different forms, but there's definitely commonality in terms of ukubonga.
I remember where
Yes, that is one of my signatures, if I may put it that way, when I sign off.
He artwork at the bottom.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow, man.
Right.
What has it done for your life? Does a moment like that contribute anywhere in what happens to you beyond that point?
The overall picture of the privilege that I've been given to introduce President Nelson Mandela as the first head of state, as an icon of our liberation in many formative stages of the new dispensation, have actually given me, a variety of decoration.
Yeah.
Not only here at home, in the continent and the world over, because I became known as Nelson Mandela's official poet laureate, and that on its own attracted a number, volumes and volumes of invitations across the globe. So one of the things that it has given me is exposure to travel, in all the major cities of the world, to be a special guest to all the prominent international poetry festivals and cultural festivals, fashion festivals. I mean, I think I'm the only traditional oral poet to even feature and appear in the New York
Fashion Week.
Fashion Week. I was there. And coincidentally, I was even dressed by Anglo gold. So I was wearing real gold.
Whoa.
They took my porcupine quill crown and did a replica of it, but with gold. So the quills were gold and so on. So I featured there and the whole dress code. So I was there in 1999.
What?
As a special guest there. So I've been to all these major things across the globe.
You could not have anticipated that.
Never thought in my dreams that I would get to that. And it hasn't stopped, David.
Really?
It still continues to rain. Because in 2023, October, I was invited in Los Angeles by the Hollywood Prestigious and African Awards to come and receive an accolade as an International Man of the Year, they called it. So I never thought that I would go right in the heart of the entertainment or showbiz city, like
because that's what
to receive.
Because it almost becomes that you become a performer now. Do you know what I mean?
Yes, there are instances where now I'm invited to do regular appearance and actually present some of the works which I have done or reflect on certain things that I've done in the past. Yes, but I always try to customize every rendition to the occasion.
Or to the moment.
Yes.
Because you and I met very young, around that era.
Yes.
And it's so embarrassingly when Zolani first saw me, and I was like, hey, mention the name of my ex-girlfriend. I can't even believe you remember my ex-girlfriend.
Yeah.
An ex of many, many years ago.
Absolutely. One of the critical techniques of a traditional oral poet is retentive memory.
Wow, of course.
Yeah. So
you possess
the hard drive never fills up.
Yeah. You buy more terabytes.
And were able to sort of bring it to the fore.
You do.
Absolutely.
I was blown away. I haven't heard about it in more than 15 years.
We don't forget.
And you remembered.
Yeah.
That's amazing. You know what?
Memory is the weapon, as Don Matera used to say.
Yes. Eh?
Yes.
But it's a weapon that can work for or against when we choose to forget.
Yeah.
Because you call our story a miracle.
Yes.
We all call it a miracle, particularly those who were there before and after.
Absolutely.
But this is slowly becoming a nightmare.
Yeah, correct. We have moved from the miracle that was actually celebrated not only by South Africans, but it also inspired the entire mother continent and the world over. But things have turned around 360 degrees to be where we are now. And it is a moment where we cannot be proud of where we are. But it is also a moment for us to take stock and reflect and ask a question as to where did we go wrong, with a view or a purview to do some correction. Because I don't think we have drifted completely, but we can point exactly where the problem is. And we don't need scientists to do a diagnostic of what is actually wrong for us to come up with the right remedy. We know the problem. Yes, we know the problem. And unless we are objective and consider those subjective factors, but we be objective with the intention to correct the wrongdoing so that we can move forward. Because South Africa remains a hope for the rest of the continent. We are a country that has everything that it takes to remain having the rule of law. We can be a very good springboard for the entire continent to transform.
True.
All the African states can come to South Africa to benchmark. All we need to do is to correct where we are wrong, because the institutions are still there. And the majority of the institutions have not collapsed. We still have very good institutions that are a good point of reference that could be used to actually do a turnaround.
Yes.
I mean, the first 15 years of our democracy were very good. Of course, good as they were, there were still things that could have happened in the first 15 years that did not happen. One of those is the issue of addressing the land question appropriately and properly. The issue of addressing the unfair distribution of the wealth appropriately and also fairly. And then the issue of dispensation and the issue of justice and access to justice.
Got you.
Right? Because as we were now, we are a free people, but the majority of the poorest of the poor cannot access justice in the same way you and me can.
And it's an affordability issue.
It becomes an affordability issue, and yet it's not supposed to be like that. In a post-colonial country like South Africa, you ought to ensure that everybody else is equal before the law, literally and in actual terms.
True.
But that is not the case. We are not equal. If you cannot afford a lawyer or an advocate, then you are likely
to lose your case.
To lose your case.
That's it. It's as simple as that.
Simple as that, yes. Yeah. So those are some of the things that we ought to address. Then the issue of corruption has become a pandemic in our country.
Yeah.
And the issue of leadership that doesn't have the capacity to lead the country properly has become an issue to the extent that we have to insist that leaders must be elected, but their merit must also be taken into account.
True.
It should not just be the question that people simply love you and therefore out of love and you negate the capacity to do the right. Then it becomes a problem.
But we come from a history of rewarding political, what do I call them? Political heroes. People who fought in the trenches, and we forgive them for not going to school, and I'll use this because that's where you ended. We forgive them for not going to school because they were working hard to save us from the horrible experience of apartheid. What do you say to that?
Well, we are talking about a generation that didn't have the rights that we have in the new South Africa. So politically speaking, those political freedom fighters, I think we can employ a different measure in looking at them because they didn't have access to education. Education was a privilege under the apartheid state. So we can give them a discount. But when we speak about administrative leadership of the country, starting from the director generals going down, those people ought to be qualified. You can't just take someone who is underqualified to actually expect that person to be an accounting officer and to administer billions and billions of rands. Then you are likely to have a problem.
But part of, I want to hold on to this discussion for a little bit longer. Part of the challenge we have very often, it's not at union building. It's at the level of service delivery, right at the very bottom, where you find a councillor, who's the most spoken, everybody loves him in the township, and when they stand at 8, Lomuntu, and an old school stand at 8, mine and yours stand at 8, I create Banban.
Yes.
And this person is loved by people. Then how do you give a person like that a discount or not give him a discount in 2025?
This is some of the things that we have to correct going forward. We can understand that we had to look at potential given the historical experiences and historical circumstances, that some of our people didn't have access to education, and education was only limited to those who can afford it. But in this day and age, we have learned a lesson, and we have learned it in a very hard way. So we have to insist that at least someone must have metric to be allowed to be in a leadership position of that standing.
You have in recent years, and this conversation has taken us in that direction, said even before the last elections, as Contralesa, very strongly saying the divorce papers are signed basically between yourselves and the ANC. Maybe you didn't use those words, but there's lots of interviews where you say, even your president said, well, the love is gone. It's no longer the same. Even after the election, said, I struggled to get hold of the president, and it never used to be the case. What has happened? And you're a long-time ally of, if I would use a phrase like that, of the ANC.
Well, David, let me start from the beginning. The ANC itself was founded at the behest of traditional leaders. When the ANC was established in 1912, there was even a house of traditional leaders, which was the highest decision-making body above the National Executive Committee.
Wow.
The first honorary president of the ANC was His Majesty King Dinizulu of the Zulu Kingdom. And remember that at the formation of the ANC in Bloemfontein at Vaihuku, some of the kings were there in person, including a queen from Swaziland, a king from Zambia, and our kings, including the king of Lesotho. So the apex decision-making body has always been that. So the ANC itself was born with the blessings of traditional leaders and the kings and the royalty of this country. And that's why it is referred to as umbutho wesizwe, okanye umbutho wabantu, is because nations came together to establish this movement, not as a petty party political formation, but as an instrument of liberation, as an instrument to emancipate our people, to restore the land and to restore the wealth back to its rightful owners. With traditional leaders as the custodians of the land, the culture, but also as the custodian of governance of the country, as leaders of the country, as it were. So we come from that tradition. But there was an agreement that the politicians at the level of the NEC will run the day-to-day administration of the affairs of this liberation movement.
Got you.
Then somewhere along the line, I would say some people came with the idea of doing away with that apex body.
Is it before liberation? Before?
No, during the liberation.
The struggle.
During the struggle itself. Yes. The politicians, in their maneuvers, outmaneuvered, I would put it that way, the traditional leaders, and they did away with that apex structure without coming back to the traditional leaders to hear their view about that matter. So they simply took a decision upon themselves so that they take all the power to deal with all the matters that are related to that.
Do you know, if you ask some of those that were there at the time, what could have informed a decision such as that?
But in terms of history, I do know that it was during the era of Dr. A.B. Xuma as the president of the ANC, having gone to the US to study there. When he came back, he brought to himself some of the advisors who happened to be white people. One of them is Bram Fischer, who we know that is from the Free State. And actually the Free State International Airport is named after him. He was also a lawyer. Dr. A.B. Xuma was a medical doctor. He advised, he's among the advisors, who actually said this doesn't augur well and it won't do well in the international arena. Wow. So we ought to do away with it. I'm just
yes.
paraphrasing so that I don't give you a long story.
True.
I'm making the long story short. So in a nutshell, it happened during that era. But there was absolutely no consultation with her. So that decision didn't carry the blessing of the institution of traditional leadership. But fine, because we were at the height of the struggle, there was no time to engage on that matter because the struggle was continuing. And anyway, the leaders, all of them were committed to the ultimate objective of the National Democratic Revolution.
That never changed, irrespective of whether the blessings of traditional leaders was there or not.
Nothing changed materially, if I may put it that way. But there was no longer a consultation. But because there was going to be a need in future of something that they never thought of when they changed that clause. In the 80s, when the mass democratic movement was engaging the apartheid state was also thinking on how to counter the revolution.
Okay.
So they then went out to royalty, to houses of royalty, to co-opt some of the educated and dangle a carrot to say, join this state and we'll give you power over certain areas of your communities.
That's the Bantustan era.
That's how the Bantustan started. Because the white people wanted to use our own against ourselves.
Of course.
Right?
Divide and
rule,
rule,
they recruited those that were educated in particular and dangled a carrot to give them power. Some of them took it with the view that they will use those homelands as liberated zones. But it was clear that this was very divisive among the African majority, right? So it was in that context that the white apartheid South Africa, was using some of our traditional leaders to beautify the apartheid state in the form of the TBVC state and the homeland system.
Are you saying?
Which created a big problem now for the liberation movement. Because in order to get to Pretoria, we had to remove our own. You understand? Which was a very difficult...
which is what happened in the end.
We had to.
Yes.
Because they were actually described as part of the enemy.
So are you saying if things were done right...
Yeah.
And not ignore the traditional system that was there to form the ANC, it's possible that even Bantustan would not have existed.
Absolutely. I would argue that the apartheid state figured it out that there was a weakness on the part of the movement for having removed traditional leadership from their structures.
Got you.
And therefore, that loophole, they use it. That blind spot, they use it, to their advantage and against and it disadvantaged the liberation movement. Then, it was then realized in the mid-80s that there was a need to regroup traditional leaders. But they used a different approach.
Okay.
They convinced traditional leadership of that day to say you need to set up an instrument wherein progressive traditional leaders can come together. And that is how the conversation around the establishment of Contralesa came into being. Contralesa gets established in 1986 in KwaNdebele, when there was a clear fallout amongst traditional leaders, those that were part of apartheid and those that were opposed to apartheid. And this actually manifested in all other areas now. In the Eastern Cape, already King Sabata Dalindyebo, the father of King Dalindyebo Uyerekaya, the present, was also tormented, harassed to the point that he left and went into exile, dying in 1986.
Died in exile?
He died in exile in Zambia.
Yeah.
Right? Then many others were persecuted. And the apartheid state actually used this thing to elevate a junior traditional leader over a senior traditional leader. So if you, David, you are the king of Bapedi, and your younger brother is a prince, therefore, if you were opposed to apartheid, they would technically depose you.
I became a problem.
And install your brother.
I became a problem.
Or what they do, they would simply recognize your younger brother and say he's a king on his own and give him, a section of the community to say you are a king, and they pump resources into him, literally undermining your authority.
And this happened in the 80s.
It happened even before the 80s, into the 80s as well as into the 90s.
Whoa.
It was part of the well-orchestrated divide and rule strategy. And it worked for apartheid because that is one of the things that actually sustained the apartheid state because of this homeland system. Because some of these leaders were very articulate because they were amongst the most educated in our communities. If you listen to them, Lucas Monasa Mangope of Bophuthatswana was very educated.
And established a very strong Bantu stand in that regard.
A formidable one.
Yes.
The same in the Ciskei. These guys built universities. They built towns from scratch. They built airports. And the same applies in the Transkei. So they delivered. And therefore, in the eyes of other people, they were actually doing what was required. Creating jobs, coming up with a flourishing agricultural sector. All of those things were actually impacting on the part of the population.
You do understand when someone would come and be nostalgic about that era because it worked for them. There are people within us, amongst us even now, who are saying those were the best years of their lives because things were going well during that time. And I hear this a lot from people who come from Bophuthatswana who say, we had it good.
Well, it's not only Bophuthatswana, David. And you see, we lost an opportunity to actually being decisive as a new administration of the new South Africa. Now people, because of the flaws that we have created, we are pushing them back to employ, a comparative analysis between what happened then and what is happening then. Remember that these guys invested a lot in education, and it was quality education.
It was.
So if they compare the education then and the education now, then it's a serious problem. The difference now is that the quantity of people who get educated is more. It was less then, but the quality was high.
Absolutely.
So we have dropped the standard, but we have increased the net in terms of ensuring that everybody has access to education. But then they never compromised on the standard. Hence, you find that all the administrators on the part of the state, even in the private sector, are people who are actually educated in that era.
And coming from even those towns and those because you come across a lot of people who say, no, I went to Mabatu High. You hear that a lot.
Absolutely.
And that was a prominent school during that very era we refer to.
Yes.
Wow.
There are certainly good things that happened in that era, but I wouldn't think that you would really compare it to what we have been able to achieve as a country for all our people in the new South Africa. It can't really be comparable. But however, people will use the strong points of certain things that were really flagships insofar as that epoch.
When I started this conversation, this part of our conversation, I spoke about the marriage, the alliance, the working togetherness within the ANC.
Yeah, so I was saying, David, is that in 1986, Contralesa gets established. And of course, Contralesa, when it was established, we only looked up to the ANC as the leader of our liberation struggle.
Sure.
So it happened that even the first cohort of the leaders that founded Contralesa, they traveled to Zambia to go and meet President General Oliver Reginald Tambo, who was more like the head of state in exile, heading a government in waiting. So they went in and for the approval of this great giant liberator, who then agreed that Contralesa has to go and do this work. We can't afford to have Pretoria basically taking our traditional leaders away from the people. So Contralesa then became this movement that was to ensure that it unites traditional leaders and its people to say that we call for the total liberation of South Africa and we're against the Bantu stance, we're against the TBVC state. That's how Contralesa is born. It is born to unite traditional leaders. It is born to champion the issue of restoring the land back to its owners, but to ensure that also the development in the rural communities actually takes effect.
Surely in the early days of this formation, it couldn't have been easy to unite the very divided traditional leaders. What were some of the core challenges? Because you already had resistance from the apartheid regime. Clearly, they were not singing your praises to say, go ahead and do this. It's a good thing.
Of course, it was a mammoth task because we were to basically recruit and co-opt traditional leaders, and we were fighting against a state machinery. We didn't have the resources that could equate the power that those that were with the state had. So it was very, very difficult. But the good thing, because we were standing for something that is right, for something that ought to happen, it was not that difficult. You will remember that the first president of Controlesa was brutally assassinated in 1990. And we believe that his killing has the hand of apartheid Pretoria. There was no question about it because they were so irritated with this movement, which was becoming vibrant, which was growing at a very fast rate, and actually having a footprint as quickly as possible in all the corners of the country.
And you sustained it. It continued. It never stopped. It continues till today.
The killing of Inkosi Mhlabunzima Phumulo, instead of demoralizing the leadership and the members, it actually gotten them inspired even more, and they got determined to go forward and forging ahead. And indeed, the work of Controlesa was supported by the African National Congress.
Yeah.
And Controlesa was also working closely with other liberation movements like the PAC,
of course,
as well as AZAPO. So we never were really choosy, but we were quite clear that the ANC is the leader of our struggle as a movement of the people that was founded by our own forefathers.
During the 94, and I'll say the 90 to 94, where conversations and codesas and all of that was happening, how present was the traditional leaders in those type of conversation? And I asked this question largely attaching it to the last minute entrance of IFP, which obviously in that regard was seen as a resistant movement and all of that. In answering that, bear in mind that technical detail that has to do with the IFP as well.
Well, the Congress of Traditional Leaders of South Africa is predominantly the only vanguard organization that represents traditional leaders in the country together with their communities. We might not have been involved in the talks about talks as well as CODESA 1, but when it comes to CODESA 2, which was to seal the negotiated settlement for a new dispensation, we were there as Controlesa. We were represented. But also traditional leaders from their own regions were there in the negotiation table. So we were pushing for South Africa not to be called a republic, for South Africa to be the United Kingdoms of Southern Africa, because that's what we are. And we're making it a point that if we reduce ourselves into a republic, we would be inheriting an apartheid instrument that we cannot have a clear understanding of its originators. And we will find ourselves pushing the same mission, but just changing the seats from white to black. Then, unfortunately, we were defeated in that
in those talks.
On those talks, particularly on that point. But one thing that we mainstreamed as Controlesa was that the new South Africa ought to have, at a national level, a house of traditional leadership, which must be part and parcel of the parliamentary precinct, so that the law-making exercise must have, an impulse of the institution of traditional leaders, so that we don't have laws that are actually based on the Eurocentric fabric of governing a country. So we won that part of ensuring that a house will be part and parcel of the structures of the new dispensation.
Yeah. Describe a South Africa that could have been had you won the United Kingdom of Africa, of South Africa.
Of Southern Africa.
Yes. Describe what type of country you would have had.
The idea that we had around that matter was based on the constitutionality of a country that we envisage. We wanted a country that was going to completely decolonize in terms of the laws of the country itself. We knew that if we were to call it a republic, then the laws were going to be Eurocentric.
True.
Right?
We still carry those laws
yes,
now.
yeah. So our idea of saying that let's have it as the United Kingdoms of Southern Africa, we wanted African laws, customary laws, but of course, we're not opposed in taking some progressive international laws to be part and parcel of what we're talking about. We're not opposed to the Bill of Human Rights as long as it was going to be customized within the ambit of the African law. So on the overall, we're pushing for a country that must completely be liberated and be decolonized and have, African laws being foregrounded, even policy, policy making and the policy perspective of the country.
When you look at where we ended up, which is where we are now, there's an accommodation. And I use that word deliberately because I engage with a lot of lawyers and they say customary laws are accommodated.
They are accommodated.
Describe your interpretation of how they find room within this current legal system.
Well, for me, the Roman Dutch English laws are superior in the new dispensation and in the constitution of this country.
So customary law,
yes, they take a subdued position.
Okay.
And those laws are also subject to the approval.
Yes. Of courts.
Of courts.
Yes.
And courts which employ Roman Dutch English common law.
100%.
So if anything happens which is traditional and which is customary, it's either it must get the nod of the court, but if the courts, they throw it away. Let me make an example. In the traditional courts, the kings and senior traditional leaders are presiding officers. In other words, they are judicial officers.
Yes, they are judges and they are lawyers and judges.
Yes. So if they take any decision there, it can actually be declared as unlawful. So those courts actually are not given the same status, and
but the Constitution gives them power.
No, the Constitution does give them some powers, but there is also an issue that people can opt out of that. They can actually boycott them.
Me as a subject within the trial.
Yes, let's say you come from Bakhatla Bakafela.
And I say, nah.
And Khosi Pilane is your Khosi there in Moruleng. And then if you are summoned there, you can undermine those summons and say, I'm not prepared to go there. I would rather go to the so-called the civil court, as if those courts are uncivilized. Yes. So that's how. So it's still full of coloniality in terms of how it is couched. So you are correct to say we are accommodated as long as we conform to what the Roman Dutch law, English law says.
But the way you presented it sounds wrong. It sounds like it shouldn't be like that.
It shouldn't be. And we believe that the majority of our people are suffocated by this condition. Our constitution is said to be the best in the world. But I can tell you that there are certain laws and acts and pieces of legislation that are actually hated by the people of this country. If you were to put them to test by way of referendum, they will be rejected. So many funny things have been passed by the new parliament of the new South Africa against the will of the majority of the people.
Why do you think that is? How do they end up here? How did we end up here with our very people who are meant to be representing us, the very stalwarts that we speak of so highly? How did they let this end up here?
Well, South Africa is a country that has attracted a lot of interest internationally, especially the West. The Western countries are here on the ground and they are represented by different formations. Some of them are NGOs, some of
human rights.
Some of them are institutes that are heavily funded. They lobby for these things to happen. And they use an undercurrency and, covert means to ensure that certain things actually take effect even in law. They even lobby the judges. I remember that the Chief Justice, Mogoeng, once said that he was approached and was offered many things. And all of that is part of the lobbying.
Yeah.
And it is intended to ensure that the interests of some of the foreign tendencies actually take root, and they actually get accommodated in the form that it happens, that certain laws are just straitjacketed.
With what objective? What is it about us that they want so badly?
It's many things, David. Like I say, that these Western countries have an interest. The land here in South Africa still predominantly belongs to people of European origin. And the wealth of this country predominantly also still is firmly in the hands of the people of European origin. But they have got businesses here. They've got land. They've got holiday homes. They've got many things here in South Africa. And for them, South Africa has a good weather, and South Africa is a good springboard to the entire continent. So they see this as a mislocated European country that happens to be here. So this interest is as old as the time Jan van Riebeeck came here in 1652.
Yes.
So it hasn't changed. And they will do everything they can to protect that interest. That's why you have political parties that are part and parcel of the political terrain of our country being heavily funded by the same interest, so that they actually pursue that agenda and protect the interest of these foreign people.
I've read somewhere a comment you made, and I want to attach it to the statement you're making now, where you said, because now you're talking about lobby groups and influence.
Yeah.
But also we have to talk about us ourselves as South Africans. We tend to be very kind and very welcoming. And there's a point you make in some interview where you say our kindness may have also worked against us, where we said Ngenan, and then they got in, and we didn't know the intention was
Absolutely.
ill, and it worked against us. Give us more detail into the statement like that.
Well, our culture of Ubuntu is such that we open our doors to our homes, especially to people who are passerbyers, you know. And so when the uninvited guests from Europe came here, we did the natural thing that represents our social fabric of being a welcoming people, of being warm and generous and kind. So we embraced them. We gave them food. We gave them shelter, unbeknown to us that these people were going to honor us.
They had guns and they wanted land.
Yes, yeah.
And diamonds and gold.
So because we can't change our character and our humanity as a people, we are still like that. We're still open, we're still welcoming. And this thing is, in the majority of cases, it does compromise us to a point wherein we lose a lot. And I think maybe time has come for us to have a relook in terms of how we do that. Yes.
You're asking us to change who we are.
Not necessarily to change who we are, but to be vigilant. To be vigilant and to be always on the alert.
Yes.
Because I often say that security should not be an option for us. It should be a condition.
Explain.
Look, I wouldn't say that as a country, our security is very strong.
Are we ready for war?
No, I don't. I'm not an advocate for war. There's no need for
No. I'm just asking. Because if you're going to have military, whether you're an advocate of war or not.
Yeah, well, our borders, I believe that they are compromised. Yes, they are compromised. Not only to fellow Africans, but even Europeans. I think that the Americans could be operating here under our nose without knowing. And I think many intelligence, outfits, the MI6, the CIA, and many others, I think they are on the ground in our country, I believe. Yes. And I think it would be easy for us to be exposed if anything like war would break out. And I think some of the skirmishes that happen and the catfights that happen in our communities, I think they are actually orchestrated to divert our attention from the core issues that we ought to focus on. And we find ourselves fighting over little squabbles instead of focusing on the real issues which relate to the land restoration and the economic liberation. Yes. We are always taken away from focusing on those very, very important aspects.
There's an interview where Kgosi Mokoena says the relationship with the ANC is gone. How is it today? as we speak in January, February of 2025?
Well, the relationship, I can say, David, is no longer the same. But we relate to the ANC. It's very difficult for us to give up what was started by our ancestors.
Do you still consider them, at some point, do you consider them a brother? What are they now? A distant cousin?
Well, we have not gone to a point of saying they are distant cousin. We are engaging the ANC, and we believe that we should do everything that we can to save this relationship. Because the day traditional leaders were to kiss goodbye to the ANC, it would be a complete change in terms of the political complexion of this country. And that is a huge risk.
Describe that more. What type of change would it be? Because that maybe the ANC doesn't need you anymore.
No, the ANC needs us more than we need it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, I can put it that way. But I would say, to be constructive, we need each other.
Okay.
We need each other to secure the future of this country.
Yeah.
Yes.
What kind of setup is it where Contraless and the ANC doesn't work together anymore? What type of day is that?
Well, it goes back to what I told you on how we were outmaneuvered.
So
there's a sense that the ANC only comes to us at a time when it needs us most.
Okay.
And usually that is a time leading to the election. And we always say to them, this is not a right way of relating to each other. We should actually have a day-to-day relationship wherein we say, this is how we should go about in managing the national question in the country.
True.
Because you can't manage the national question without the critical involvement of traditional leaders. You're going to miss a point. And that's why there's always a blind spot. If you look at the gap of development between the urban spaces and the rural communities, we missed an opportunity. This country is predominantly a rural country.
Absolutely.
What have we done from 1994 to date to change the complexion? So we always say the ANC wants to establish smart cities. If you want to establish smart cities, you must say you want to do that on the one hand, but on the one hand, you must say you want to establish smart villages.
Okay.
You can't go with this way
and forget this
one.
way.
Yes.
Yeah.
The urban centers are actually at the center of our community, but the rural communities are at the periphery.
True.
The center is anchored in the periphery. And in order to make sure that the periphery is not left out, you need also to bring the periphery into the center
100%.
by way of ensuring that when it comes to service delivery, dealing with the basic things, the infrastructure in rural areas, the basic needs of our people, the water, the electricity, and everything, including network, so that people can easily access the internet. Yes.
Finally, your life must stay the same.
Yes, yeah. You know, this thing exposed us dearly during the COVID period. The students that were staying in the rural areas were unable to study online.
It did expose
because there was no network. So it talks exactly to what we are saying, that actually our planning should not be based on the spatial planning which was employed by apartheid, which only focused on the bulk infrastructure around the cities. We should be intentional and intelligent enough to say, let's give much needed focus to the rural community to tame the complexion. And once we do that, we'll even attract investments in rural areas so that people don't only look at bringing investors and establishing factories only in urban cities.
That's true.
But you can do it in the rural areas. There's enough land to do that there.
Probably more land in the rural areas. You've taken government to court for neglecting a traditional council and authorities. How did that end up?
Well, we took government to court when it comes to the issue of the non-payment of certain headmen in certain parts of the country.
Not all.
No, not all.
Yeah.
Other provinces were doing well.
Okay.
They were actually paying their headmen. The Eastern Cape was doing that. Mpumalanga was doing that. it was only KZN and the Northwest where there was a problem because Limpopo was also doing so. But there were also disparities on how they were paid.
True.
So we made a point that we are a unitary country. You can't have an MEC in the Northern Cape having a different pack from his counterpart from Limpopo.
100%.
It doesn't happen. They are given the same pack, regardless of the size of the province.
It's job level,
and therefore the package is the same.
Yes.
So we're making the same point to say traditional leaders of the same rank must actually be given the same package because we're the same country. So even before we went to court, we knew that this is a very easy winnable case.
Okay.
So we didn't actually have to get an order from the court. When we approached the court, then the government simply came to us and they granted.
So it was an easy win, so to speak.
It's an easy win. And there are a number of other areas where these disparities are occurring. And we continue to engage the ANC to say, do this. I think now the engagement will be different. We'll be engaging the GNU.
Ooh.
Yeah. So
you say it with a highlighter on it.
Yeah,
yes.
Because it has always been difficult because of the historical relationship we have with the ANC, that we can simply take the ANC government to court. Yes. But it will not be difficult to take the GNU to court because it is not the ANC government.
Because with the ANC government, you have to first start by conversing.
We have to converse, and we believe that we have to resolve matters politically, if I may put it that way, rather than legally.
Under a tree somewhere, not in the courts.
Under a proper constructive engagement.
Yes.
Imagine if we were to say, you have treated these traditional leaders, they were not paid from 1994 to 2016. Therefore, you owe them their income for all of those years.
Yes, let's backdate. Let's
backdate.
Oh.
Yeah. So, I mean, if we were in a fighting spirit, we would have to go to that extent. But we were treading very carefully that we are dealing with our own liberation movement. And we give them a benefit of doubt to correct these things in an amicable fashion.
Yeah.
And that's how we have resolved.
And so far, so good.
Well, in some cases, there are still things that are outstanding, David.
Yeah.
Which we think that they need to be resolved. The traditional councils are not in the right format, the way that we want them to be structured.
Okay.
And sometimes when their term of office rises, the officials simply leave those things in abeyance. And it takes 2 to 3 years before they are reconstituted, which is not right.
And then there are new ones who are starting from scratch.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So you can't allow a leadership vacuum. So we think that there is an intention to collapse this traditional council if you do this. And also, there are no requisite budgets which are made for this council. And I think these are some of the things that we are going to take them to court. Really. We are compelled now that we can no longer wait because things have come to where we are. And in order to ensure that we have a secured future, we need to act now and act decisively. And part of that is to take the government to court to correct these things because they are not only illegal, they are unconstitutional.
In our current political setup, or government setup, let me correct myself, which ministry it recognizes you directly? Is there a ministry within that looks after traditional leaders in that context?
Look, the presidency has a role to play in the traditional leader because you know that the kings are certified by the presidency. They are not anointed.
Yes, of course.
They are not anointed by the president.
We saw it recently again with the Zulu king.
Yes. They are anointed and they are put into that position by their own royal families, but the president has a seal of approval through the certification, right? 100%. So the presidency has a role that it plays. And secondly, the Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs Minister is a line function.
Not a dotted line, clear line.
Yeah, is a line function minister. Secondly, because traditional leaders are also custodians of heritage culture, so the Minister of Culture ought to have a relationship with traditional leaders. Then the Minister of Land and Rural Development is also naturally very relevant to traditional leadership. So you find that it goes beyond these three ministries. But with the other ministries is more like a support function. Yes, over and above these ministries.
Would you, in an ideal setup, say there should be a specific ministry that looks after this? Not having other things that they're doing. This is what they do.
This is what Contralesa is calling for. We actually engaged the president. I think we convinced the president that it doesn't make sense that you have traditional affairs separated from rural development, separated from culture. We said, why don't you, President, put these ones together so that you promulgate a new department and a ministry which deals with culture, with traditional affairs, and rural development, all under one minister. The president was saying this makes a lot of sense. But of course, the president has to go and sit down with his national executive and they deliberate. Sometimes it takes longer for this decision to be taken. So with that one, it's not something that you can take to court. It's something that you just constantly have to engage the political leaders of the country until it makes sense to them.
It's that lobbying that you were talking about.
Yeah, and it takes longer.
Yes.
And time flies.
Do you feel there's the pace of development is slower than it should be?
I think so. I think the pace of development is slower than it should be, partly because the bulk of the resources in this country sit with the private sector. And I believe that the private sector is not investing enough resources in our country, particularly in the rural landscape. I believe that the bulk of the money in this country goes outside the country for reinvestments elsewhere.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, for an economy like ours, for us to be collecting about 1.3 trillion a year, I think it leaves much to be desired.
Are you saying where's the rest going?
Yeah, I mean, this economy is too big to say that our revenue collection, our national revenue fund on annual basis, it's only a mere 1.3 trillion. That's too little for a country with such a huge wealth like ours. It doesn't make sense. It seems to me that something is wrong. I think our sums are totally incorrect. And I think it's time for the Treasury to wake up. Because I think we should be 10 times
bigger than we are.
In terms of our national revenue fund.
Yeah. It goes back to the statement you made earlier. There are other forces.
Certainly there are other forces that are at play that are countering the tax regime in the country and the treasury regimes in the country to protect those that are exploiting the natural resources of our country to the detriment of our people. I believe that this country should be bigger than the United Arab Emirates as an economy. Yeah. Yes. We've got so much. They just have oil. We have everything.
Yeah, well, we gave most of it away. You know that. We don't own the mines. We gave most of it away many years ago.
Insofar as the legislation, the mineral resources of this country belongs to the state.
Well,
so, but in reality,
yes,
it's something else.
That's what I want.
In reality,
we have companies that are registered in the what's that, stock exchanges across the world.
Absolutely.
That get diamonds from
unless we take a decisive stand to turn the fortunes of our country. We will continue to be in this trajectory. And I am an advocate, and Contralesa is advocating not just for the transformation, but to say the wealth of this country must be embedded to the natives of this country in particular.
You have battled for years with government, past and present government. Well, by this I mean before apartheid and now, before the end of apartheid and now, about land. Land at the core of your issues comes always prominent.
Yeah.
What achievements have you and strides have you achieved in the last 30 years in trying to address this small issue? There's a draft land tenure bill that's pending a signature for many years. What are the issues there?
Well, David, to be quite frank, our efforts in terms of land, restitution, reform, restoration have went zilt.
Zero.
Zero.
No achievement.
No achievement at all.
Wow.
It's very disappointing, and it's astonishing that we've been engaging a progressive government. I mean, we said, for a starting point, the communal land, which is under the stewardship of traditional leaders as we speak, that land does not need any money to exchange. Hence, it's already with traditional leaders, but the authority is with the minister of land. So we said, government, just transfer this land to the respective traditional authorities of the country. It's a question of punching buttons in the computer.
Before buttons, what does the Constitution say? Because it's easy for someone to then argue it constitutionally.
The Constitution, Section 25 of the Constitution allows. It gives effect to the state that it can do such an exercise.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
But there's reluctance. I'm saying there's reluctance, and there's no political will, because we met with the government in 2018. We engaged the president and the deputy president, and we agreed that the communal land, which is actually less than 10%, must be transferred back to the traditional authorities. And then once we get that done, we can then deal with the rest of the land, which is still
of course,
in the hands of the foreigners.
Yeah.
But they can't do this. Instead, some people were raising a crazy argument when we were talking about expropriation of land without compensation. They were also pointing to this land under the jurisdiction of traditional leaders.
They always
and
point
yet
to
that
this land.
And yet that land is not part of land parcels that were stolen. It's land.
It was never stolen to begin with.
Yes, this one is in the hands of aborigines, the natives. Traditional leaders are Africans. They are the custodians of this land, and this is their land which they hold on behalf of their communities.
Yeah.
But it's a mission to get that done. That's why I'm saying that there's no political will.
Help me understand in practical terms, when you say even that's this land that is already in the hands of traditional leaders.
In paper.
In practice, how does it work when you have to consult the minister?
You see, where it frustrates is that, yes, the land is under the jurisdiction.
Yes.
But in terms of the paper, the minister
holds the final say.
Yes. The land is held in trust in the office of the minister.
Got you.
So where it manifests, if you want to bring investors there, you can't do that without the signature of the minister. The minister has to rezone and do all of those processes.
Yeah.
And if the minister doesn't want, then nothing will happen.
And in answering the land reform, restitution and everything, you said zero was achieved. So that means...
We have not achieved anything. Of course, there are few land parcels that have been returned to certain communities.
Yes.
But sometimes the way it gets done, it's done to actually divide communities. So if the community of KwaMashabela has made an application claiming a particular piece of land, when it gets returned, it is now put under what is the CPA, Community Property Association. So it becomes an island within the community, KwaMashabela. And then it is given to certain families to say, okay, it is being given back to this. Then that has created havoc and many skirmishes within our communities. It's a very, very divisive instrument. It's not progressive at all. And we reject it with a scorn that it deserves. We're saying that when a community makes a claim, that land must be returned back to that community.
It makes sense.
And it has proven not to work, this concept of CPAs throughout. Wherever this CPA exists in the majority of cases, they have created quarrels and skirmishes within those communities. There's no stability. People are always fighting because those that are part of the CPA, suddenly they are like a chiefdom now of a special type. Yeah.
They got special treatment in that situation.
Yes.
You have highlighted very often that you are fighting for land to be returned to its people, for land to be given to Induna and Amakosi to run and control. Yet you're fighting for 10% of land And on the other hand, there's a lot of land that belongs
we're not
to the foreign.
We're not fighting
foreigners.
for 10%, but it's a question of saying that let's deal with the first things first.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
This one. But we want the entire land of the country to be returned to the natives.
Mm-hmm.
It's a right thing to do.
It's a difficult thing to do.
It is a difficult thing to do, but it is something that is doable.
If you were to be minister of land, and what would be your first act? Interesting. We have a PAC minister of rural development and land affairs. You would expect this process to be 10 times easier because of a ministry like his. If you were to become minister right now,
I don't think
in practice, what would you do?
I don't think the minister as an individual has that authority, but he has to champion the policy trajectory that has to be followed. Mm-hmm. Of course, we are hopeful that the minister, who is the president of the PAC, as an advocate of land and land being item number 1 on the agenda of the PAC.
Their manifesto is land first.
He's going to move mountains when it comes to that. But it's not going to be easy as we...
Even for him.
It's not going to be easy even for him.
Yeah.
So, but I think in this country, in order to deal with the land issue, it's one issue that requires its own CODESA. Yes. I don't think that it must be left to the politicians to deal
in Parliament.
Yes, in Parliament. I think we must come together as a people, because I think those who hold this land are actually 25 years, are always 25 years ahead of us in terms of how they divert our attention from that question. So unless we sit down and have a special summit that must deal with the issue of land. You see, the land question in South Africa is confused by so many pieces of legislation. And those pieces of legislation are intended actually to create the stagnants.
Stop.
Yeah, nothing happens because there is this law, and when you read this law, you can't read it with the other law.
Sure.
It's a problem. So we need to go to a point where we zoom in and say, let's repeal all the apartheid laws around the land issue in the country and come up with a new land legislation that is going to be an all-encompassing land legislation. First and foremost, we say the land belongs to all who live in it. That statement is not true, and it can really be a celebrated statement, but we rather say all those who live in South Africa must have access to land, but it must not necessarily belong to all who live in it.
That statement is made true.
We can't, because we've got African brothers who are in England who have become citizens of that country, and begin to say that the land of England,
of the English,
it belongs to everyone who live in England. It's untrue.
So you're playing the same
principle. The land in China belongs to Chinese. The land in Britain belongs to British.
The land in Africa?
The land in Africa can't be said it belongs to everybody. It belongs to Africans.
Yeah, well, that statement has been said, put on placards for many, many, many years. By the ANC, amongst others.
Well, if this generation fails to do this, if this generation fails to actually achieve this objective of restoring land to the Africans, then we must not think that there will not be a possibility of another revolution by our own children, because our own children are questioning us, are questioning even our integrity and our thinking as to how do we allow a situation like this to prevail unabated. And also linked to the issue of land is the issue of economy.
Of course.
How do we allow the economy to belong to a minority and the majority are actually excluded in the mainstream economy?
You said those that are in control are always 25 years ahead in terms of creating...
the ruling class.
Yes, creating an environment like that.
I normally say in South Africa, when you look at the classes, there's a ruling class, the one that owns the means and the factors of production. And then you've got the political class, which is the class which includes those who are lawmakers, who are sitting in parliament. Yes, but the power that they have doesn't exceed the ruling class. I believe that the ruling class is in charge of the country and it calls the shots. And it is able to manipulate, outmaneuver the political class. Yes. And then the working class has completely been weakened and divided.
And in that division, you lose power.
In that division, you use power. The only power that the working class seemingly may have is the right to vote. Other than that, I don't see any other thing, because I have witnessed this country from 1994 to date. When you look at the material conditions and look actually what has actually changed, there's little that has changed. Of course, for the first time, our people have swelled the ranks of the state. We have got more than 1.2 million who are absorbed by government. The majority of the municipalities are led by our own people. But be that as it may, we earn these salaries. Even these salaries do not belong to us. We are just conveyor belts for the big business.
Explain it, because I believe that theory, but I want you to say it.
Well,
you earn the salary.
I earn a salary.
And then what happens to it?
And then you buy a house, you buy a car, you buy clothes, you buy food. You find that you get all of these things in credit. When you receive your salary, you go to pay all of these things. Say Puma Yonk.
Yeah.
It doesn't come to our communities. Unless we restructure things. Who said we should pay a house over 20 years and we should actually make that a law? It's not empowering our people. It disempowers our people.
It gets worse when the manufacturers of the cars are not your people.
You understand
the
what
manufacturer of the clothes are not your people.
If you're buying a car of 1.5 million as other people do, you pay it over 5 years. But if you buy a house of 1.5 million, you pay over 20 years. And by the time you reach that 20 years, you have lost it.
True.
So why don't we make laws that are about empowering and protecting our people and say, if you buy a house, you must pay it within 5 years and this property belongs to you. And that's empowerment. I have seen members of parliament who go to parliament from the shacks. They go to parliament for 5 years. They live in the government houses. After 5 years, you are not elected back to parliament. You simply go back to the shack. For me, that doesn't make sense. You should empower even the parliamentarians. If you are elected at that level, you should be sorted for life. You must be able in that 5 years to buy a property.
Well, one can argue that those are your own personal decisions. You were earning a salary and you made bad decisions.
It's the systems.
Yeah.
It's the system, the way things are structured, policy-wise. They are not about actually harnessing people to a particular direction. The leadership that has a vision must actually channel people in a particular direction.
Is it intended?
You mustn't just say it's up to them.
Is it intentional, the system?
It's intentional because the ruling class wants it to be like that. Because it benefits them.
But what?
It benefits their business. They continue to say even those salaries of parliamentarians belong to them because the cars they buy, they have to pay them through their dealerships.
However, the long-term implication of that situation creates poverty and instability, socioeconomic issues, which creates a chaotic country. Surely that can be a benefit.
My brother, if you look at crime, who does crime affect? It doesn't affect the ruling class. It affects us in our own communities. So they create this commotion deliberately because at the end of the day, they are protected. They are able to remote control everything that happens into the country. Not to a point where it must collapse.
I'm going to ask what may be a controversial question. Do you think they remote controlled the creation of GNU? And I'll tell you why I'm asking this question. Because ANC could have gone with anyone.
Well, we do have that sense as Contralesa, that the issue of the GNU was predetermined even before the election, that it will go this direction. Because it was spoken about. There were even special conferences that were called on possible, what you call it?
Coalitions.
Yes. So for me, that this thing was, again, I think the ruling class had a finger on this.
But if that's the case, then our rulers or those who lead us, as the ANC in this context, do not have power, really. If that statement is true.
Well, the power that we have, in any case, cannot give us what we expect as the people, because we have had an expectation for 30 years. and expectation on issue that matters most in the national agenda, which is the land question. We have not been able to resolve the land question. Instead, when the issue of land was being addressed, billions and billions were being paid to those who stole the land. They are the one who stood benefiting on the land issue. With the little land parcels that were given.
How were they benefiting exactly?
The price tag that was attached to the land parcels was exorbitant.
And government had to pay it.
One individual could get an easy billion. Yes, who owned a farm. So we used a huge chunk of our resources in the willing buyer, willing seller instrument to give money. And we failed to give subsidy and support to those people who took those farms. And those farms collapsed, the majority of them.
It was almost a Zimbabwe reality when land went to blacks, but nothing came of it.
Yes, because if you give people land, but you don't give them equipment and resources so that they can continue to do the commercial, agricultural work, then it's going to collapse.
Are we actively working towards solving this land issue? Is there, because I asked this question, you were saying our young people are asking questions. Are they really asking questions about the land? Are they preoccupied with it to a point where a revolution, a revolt is imminent? Because I get a sense that there's a generation of people like yourselves and me who will pass away. And no one will continue this conversation ever.
I think that we are postponing the revolution to our own children. Our own children are seriously asking this question. And they are now the majority in our country. And I think chickens will come to roast in our country if we are not careful. I don't think we have really been serious about dealing with the issue of the land. I think we've been politicking. There was a time when we had majority in parliament as the ANC. We didn't do it. Over at least four administration to 5
over 30 years.
So it didn't happen. So when you talk about seriousness, I don't think there is a political will. I repeat my statement.
Is that opportunity? Have we missed that opportunity forever?
Not forever, not for good. I think we still have a chance to correct and deal with it. Because I think if this issue of land is not resolved, it may trap our children or our children's children into a bloody war. Yes. So for me, I think it's something that ought to be resolved within the legal jurisprudence.
Helen Zille, leader of the DA, says if you can prove that land belongs to your people, there's no reason why you cannot get it back.
We don't need to prove to her.
Well, not necessarily to her. She's saying, I asked her the question about land. Land should go to those that rightfully own it. She said, that's true. But if they can prove that it belongs to them.
Well, she's not the right person even to make that statement. I think people like Helen Zille should leave the issue of the land to the natives and the aborigines of this country, because they do not have a right to tell us how to deal with our land. Helen Zille originates from a particular hemisphere in terms of her ancestry. And she knows that the land was taken away from us brutally so, where our people were killed, beheaded, jailed, exiled, and banished. All of these dirty things were done, terrorized them to be where we are today. We're dispossessed through the barrel of the cannons and guns. Wars were fought for this land to be taken away from us. It's easier said than done with what she's saying. So she must back off and allow us as the natives to deal with it. This constant undermining of the African majority in their own situation will bear very bad fruit. It's not necessarily because he is insightful. She is insightful when she speaks like that. And the land issue is a very emotive issue. And this is just but one issue that may unite our young people to actually start a revolution in the manner that they dealt with the education situation.
In 76 and now with Fees Must Fall.
Fees Must Fall, yes. And once that happens, then we'll have a very, very serious issue where the country will burn. So she must not set up the country for fire.
You were saying it, the land issue, that the natives must deal with it. But what is the holdup? If indeed, listen to what you've said, it's political will.
Yeah, we need leaders with guts.
But that political power has been in the hands of the natives.
We need leaders with guts. We need leaders with responsibility. Leaders who must not look just in front of their feet. Leaders who must look into the future and know that if we don't deal with this matter systematically now, this matter will deal with us systematically then.
But if that never happens, say if nothing happened in 30 years, it's easy that nothing else will happen in another 30 years.
I don't believe so. I believe that we will not pass another 30 years without this happening. The 30 years of the new dispensation, the first 30 years of the new dispensation, people have given this government a chance.
True.
Yes. The fact that the people reacted in the manner they did in this election is a clear indication that the masses of our people can act.
Do you think the message is clear enough to those that met, to the powers that be? Do you think they've heard the very statement you're making?
If they have not learned from what happened on the 29th of May in 2024, then they will never learn.
I see them each other. I see them saying KZN KZN leadership must be dissolved and Gauteng leadership must be dissolved. That just looks like people that are blaming each other for what happened.
No, I think they must take stock of what has happened and they must be objective because it can't just be an issue of certain provinces. Our people, there was a discontent in the entire country and people were raising these cogent issues seriously into the public domain on how the ANC needs to act up.
Get their act together. In simple words.
So I believe that if they cannot learn from this, then this will be the beginning of the end of the National Democratic Revolution. Maybe a new revolution will emerge.
Whoa. Yeah, that's a tricky one.
It is a tricky one.
I wonder what type of revolution will that be? Are there signs of the next revolution?
My worry is that if you leave a revolution to a people without guidance, then the outcomes of that could be disastrous. It's always better that you have a guided revolution. And the ANC is in a right position to actually do that, to take a corrective measure and deal with the pertinent issues, especially the land issue. It's not about black economic empowerment. That's secondary to us. Let's deal with the first things first, the economy, the land, and then we deal with the issues of empowerment and so on and so forth. Because if you don't do it, then somebody will do it.
You're postponing it.
You are postponing it, but also you are opening a loophole for other people to start a revolution which could just be massified and be followed. And it may have disastrous consequences. It may be successful, but it may also create a disaster.
True.
Yes, and it may go this way or that way.
And most revolutions come with bloodshed. You don't want that.
That's the thing. Yes, that's the thing. You don't want that. And like I say, a revolution now of a second revolution or a real revolution may just have so much influencing because, like I said, there's so much interest in this country.
Are there signs already of the next, and I call it in inverted commas, the next revolution? Are there signs of people that are saying, yes, we're not happy with this and we want to change now?
There are signs.
Enough for one to be concerned. There are signs.
I mean, I can tell you clearly that the Contralesa leadership and membership is fed up on how the new government has dealt with the issue of land. And part of their discontent is pointing to a situation where they want to take a decision.
Okay.
They are thinking about what could be the best way of ensuring that we get what we want at the end of the day without being dependent to the third party or the second party. That's a very serious issue. And there may be other people who think like that. But when traditional leaders are thinking like that, For me, I don't think the manner in which His Majesty in KZN is dealing with the issue of the Ingonyama Trust is isolated from this conversation.
It's part of this.
There's something that is making him so annoyed that he is acting like that. That he is called the sole trustee of the Ingonyama Trust, but decisions are being taken elsewhere, above his head and behind his back.
Explain that?
Even the board.
Yes, because it's been in the papers very recently that with issues of the board of the Ingonyama Trust. Yeah.
You see, it's a very delicate situation. It needs to be managed very ethically and very professionally, and it must not be played into the public sphere to a point where you ridicule the king.
True.
Right? So the king, in terms of the Ingonyama Trust Act, he is the sole trustee. What does it mean when you are a sole trustee of the Ingonyama Trust? Then the minister appoint
a board.
4 of those board members are appointed by the minister. 6 of them are appointed, I would say, by the king. So the majority of those board members are appointed by the king. But when they become a board, they can now take a decision which opposes the king. That's why I'm saying that the way it plays out, it's not good that it is being dealt with in the public domain, where the board members, make statements, written, signed statements released in the public domain. The very same board that was appointed. So I think but the point I'm making is that what is playing out there shows clearly that there is an issue about the land issue.
And it continues to brew.
It continues to brew.
Quietly.
Yes, because land is very emotive. Land is a political issue and a spiritual issue. It's a heritage issue. So people become very emotional around it. Yeah.
Let's talk about the role of the traditional leadership with retaining and preserving cultural heritage, which land is very strongly in that concept. However, I want to talk about the adjustment that Contralesa and traditional leadership finds itself, where it's smack in the middle of a quickly changing world. Modernization is a part of this. Social modernization filters. You were talking about cities and rural areas and the connection between the two. There's a lot of modernization, and modernization is not only technology, but also the way people see the world.
Yeah.
How is Contralesa adjusting, or maybe how is it retaining the traditional values and cultures within a moving world?
Let me say this, David. We are a vanguard of the institution of traditional leadership in South Africa. And our role is to protect, preserve, and promote the institution of traditional rule by ensuring that we educate the public about the value system of Ubuntu and about our heritage, about our history, and about who we are and how we should harness our own identity so that we can always remain original and independent as a people. These include on how our social fabric needs to manifest. That's the first thing that we must talk about. Then secondly, we know and we are alive to the reality that culture is not static, it's dynamic. But we need to strike a balance between modernity and tradition. And we always say, as Contralesa, modernity and tradition are two sides of the same coin. You don't need to dispel tradition in order to embrace modernity, but take modernity to strengthen your own traditions.
Okay.
The example is that we come from a history of oral tradition. So you know your clan names, you know your genealogy, you know your lineage. How do we use an instrument of modernity to actually digitize that so that future generations of your own family, your own community can have this record digitized? Yes.
We will preserve it properly.
Yes, these are some of the things that we are advancing. But what we do not want is for us to simply say, let's donate our tradition and be absorbed by Google. The content of our communities in their different cultural ramifications, is the intellectual property of our communities. Let us not allow ourselves to simply donate this content to foreign instruments. Let's build capacity, internal capacity within our kingdoms, within our cultural communities, so that this content, we can actually use it to enhance, advance, and develop our own communities. Because if you give it to Google, you are actually enriching Google. So I've seen that if you want to go and Google Mashabela clans, they are found in Google.
True.
Who gave them over?
Somebody must have created the content.
Where does the intellectual property reside? These are hard questions that Contralesa is asking. So I'm saying that we need to prevent that from happening. So that's the role we play.
That makes 100% sense to me. But I want to bring an everyday cultural and modern challenge that a young person will find himself today, where they want to get married. And in 2025, this young couple who's 30 years old, they recognize only the British traditional wedding as the only form of wedding.
Absolutely.
They say, umshado simona nge white dress. If the white dress hasn't happened, you haven't been married.
Let me put it this way. The white wedding is a traditional wedding of the Europeans.
100%.
The traditional wedding of the Africans is our own traditional wedding. It's very beautiful. Actually, if you compare it to that one, it is a historical colonial apartheid issue that people tend to sort of want to do a white wedding, because the apartheid state and the colonial state rubbished our culture as a culture of savages and a culture of subhumans. So they relegated it to the background. So we need to take a deliberate action as the new government to promote our African traditions, including weddings and other things. There are other issues that are very important, which we must bring into the public domain. The rituals at birth, there are birth rituals, which we do for children, including ukukaba, including imbeleko, and many other things. And as you grow up, several rituals are performed.
Yes.
Traditional leaders are not just custodians of land. They are also custodians of our culture. They are spiritual leaders. So it's very important that we support that institution so that these things can help to solidify our people. Many of our people, you find that there are mental illness issues. And some of those are related to certain rituals that our people do not actually go through, and yet they ought to go through them.
Got you.
So it's very important that we give space and education, and even our education system must actually educate our people about these issues that are related to the wedding. Because we take it for granted that our people know how the white wedding ceremony came to be popular in an African community. They do not know it was a colonial project intended to undermine the traditional African wedding ceremony. So it's very important that when we transform society, we pay attention to detail, including what manifests in the syllabus of the student. Because without institutionalization of some of these things, they will never take effect into the public domain. So as we grow our children, as we take them to school and they spend more time at school, we need to feed them with relevant information and relevant education, which includes issues that are related to our own identity, our own culture. So that this thing, it helps to impact self-love. You see a lot of self-hate. If you look at how people deal with each other and how they respond to each other in the social media, you post something about introducing your beautiful wife, and 90% of the people will respond, they will talk negative. So we need an education that must instill self-love, pride, self-respect, and everything that is African that people must embrace, especially if it is based on good human values.
Conceptually, I agree 100% with what you're saying. What I worry about is the practice, because such should not end as conversations. We must see them.
Yeah, well,
on the ground. And that's the worry. That's the part I worry about.
Well, if we produce dramas and soapies that still propel
the English wedding,
the English wedding,
for example,
and the English culture in the public domain, then we have a responsibility to change that narrative as leadership, because we have a public broadcaster, but we also have these platforms that are independent. They must also be subjected to scrutiny in terms of what, without censorship, but you must actually take a deliberate decision to say, let's flood the net with things that represent us. Other societies do that.
Yes, 100%.
And those societies, it's a winning formula for them. That's why the United Arab Emirates is where it is. That's why Saudi Arabia is where it is. Because they don't compromise in projecting who they are, especially on the public instruments.
Similar question to one I asked earlier. Are there efforts to achieve this goal? As we speak, you and I today in 2025, do we see, because my biggest worry with our country, and I'll use hunger as an example, you cannot postpone hunger. I cannot say, let's talk about it tomorrow. It's an emergency. If it's here now, in Riasha, we have to attend to it now. What I worry about when I speak about South Africa is a sense of urgency is not there. Conceptual agreement is there, but the practice is lacking because it lacks urgency. Or maybe it has a sense of somebody else will do it. I'm not sure where there's clearly something that we're lacking. When you observe the reality, do you feel we are tending to these issues? You know, Babatin Riacha, we don't stand and hope the fire will go away on its own. Somebody who actually does something.
No, I believe we don't pay attention to it. We are not attending to these matters in a manner that we ought to do so.
Yeah.
I think we are very casual about a number of issues in our country that we ought to be very serious about. The education system, for instance, in this country, for me, it has reached a point where it is irrelevant and outdated. Yes. So you are asking me a question, are we doing something about that? We are engaging. We are saying the same statement to the ANC, that this education system is irrelevant and outdated. Who said, for instance, that a child must study for the whole year doing one class? We simply inherited that. Are with that domkop that you can't do A and B in 1 year? and also improve the content so that you take your existential realities of being African in an African terrain and the whole scenery and foreground those in your syllabus. So that at the end of the day, you have education that works for you, not education that is chasing numbers, that you have so many matriculants, you have so many graduates. At the end of the day, they can't really do anything to actually improve an economy. So for me, a relevant education is the one that needs an overhaul. You know, how it is structured, but also from a content point of view, so that it is relevant to us.
Have we given away our traditional practices by not incorporating them strongly in our education?
We have. We have not incorporated our heritage very strongly.
Do you find it anywhere in our education system, our cultural beliefs?
Well, only at a university when students start to doing research that it manifests. But for me, it ought to start at the development stage. That's where it should matter most. So it is mentioned as a by the way, not into detail, in order to conscientize, in order to properly educate and ensure that we build patriots that must have self-love for their country and a commitment to serve the nation. We don't have that in our education. Our children are dreaming about other things. They don't really have this thing that are being taught to love their nation.
I had a privilege, and I call it that because it was a very frank conversation with the CEO of AfriForum. And he says very, very simply, he says, we are a cultural group. We have no other objective but to retain the culture of the Afrikaner people. Do you feel we have the same fight and same fire within us,
we don't,
like they do?
No, we don't. I mean, we are a lone voice as Contralers because we stand for the mainstreaming of our culture, even in policy formulation. But who are we against, the waves of different political formations that are there, only seeking political power for different reasons, right? So, in order to achieve that and to be able to achieve that in the South African context, so that we can change the education system and so on, it propels us to want to go the political route.
Okay.
Because the decision making
is political
and it's taken at a political table. But we don't want to do that. We don't exist. We don't exist in order to campaign for political office. We exist in order to champion, the upholding of our cultural values and the mainstreaming of our culture, even in policy formulation, in the public discourse.
When you listen to...
So it's very difficult to influence those politicians because we have more than 300 political formations. And political formations only have respect for themselves.
Of course.
Primarily.
Yes.
But they will use other entities to get political power. When they get political power, they forget about them.
I don't expect you to agree or align with my statement, but do you understand AfriForum's agenda? Do you find that you can learn from it?
We know what they stand for.
Yeah.
And African Forum is an offshoot of Burdebond. And Burdebond stood for what the Afrikaners did when they started their trajectory of building wealth and ensuring that they preserve and protect their Afrikanerhood, so to say.
Exactly.
They've built wealth, they've built institutions, including universities, and they continue to build universities that are Afrikaner related.
True.
Because all they want to do is to protect their cultural, integrity, their identity. This is what we are fighting for. I mean, we know and we appreciate
their efforts,
their efforts
yes,
for their own.
True.
But it's nerve-wracking that we have inability to achieve that.
That's probably
as
why
Africans.
That's probably why.
And that's why we expect the government to institutionalize on those matters. Because the Afrikaners institutionalized to get where they were.
Absolutely.
They didn't do it outside the state. They made the state an instrument to achieve that objective.
Yeah, I get frustrated when we have it. We have this government.
Yes.
And we have, about you, yet there was food in the fridge.
Yeah, you can't achieve it outside the state. It's impossible.
Yeah.
We're a big country. The Afrikaners made the apartheid state a Christian state. The majority of them are Calvinians. And they were actually indoctrinated with that.
And Giekerk was
was the cornerstone of that. Yes, yeah. So I'm saying that they were resolute. And that is planted. It's now like it's in their bloodline.
Yeah.
You understand? I don't know, because it's so easy for us that we were going to be able to achieve the same without making the state a religious state.
No.
But to say that we are an African state and we are Africans. And anyone who comes from elsewhere in the world must do like Africans do in an African environment. And I don't think our culture and our values of Ubuntu would be opposed by these minorities.
They're not barbaric.
And they are not done in exclusion of them. They are actually, giving them as well a room to feel free in the equation. But we're not doing it. We simply leave things to chance. And it's a free-for-all.
And we hope it works out all on its own.
No, it won't. It needs to be channeled. It needs political leadership that is conscious itself to conscientize its population.
Traditional leadership and traditional culture sometimes is perceived as being patriarchal in its approach, where indoda is the voice of the household and so forth. How have we, over time, moved with the modern society that we exist in that says it's an equal society and so forth?
Well, as Africans, we have never had a patriarchal conduct. We have always been an egalitarian society, even long before the colonialists came here. But there was always a division of labor. The hard labor is done by men, and the soft labor is done by women.
And soft because it's not heavy.
Yeah,
not because
the heavy
it's
one
easy.
is related to masculinity.
True.
The soft one is related to femininity.
Mm-hmm.
It's a simple logic. It's based on scientific discourse. But we have never had issues that women can play a leadership role. Actually, if you go back in history and you can count hundreds of women who even played a role in the wars of dispossession and the wars of resistance. Mm-hmm. They were commanders. So really, patriarchy is something that came with colonialists, with their introduction of their religious instruments, missionary education, missionary churches, and so on. They are the ones who said women must sit on the right, men must sit on the left. All of those things were introduced in churches. Of course, they got introduced in our society to a point that some sections of our society adopted that patriarchy. But otherwise, we as Africans, we are not patriarchal in our conduct. That's why even in our kingdoms, you have a king, you have a queen mother who has authority.
True.
Right?
Who speaks truth to power.
Yes, and you have got queens who play a role, actually. They are not relegated to the background. They are also responsible for the detachment of growing maidens and young girls into a position of future leadership. They prepare them for leadership. They play different roles. So it's not an issue of men taking over power in society. They deal with matters. Actually, men, the administration of families is under the stewardship of women when it comes to our society. And understanding a family as a basic unit of society, it is administered by women. From budget point of view, from issues of catering and education of the children, the nursing of the children, the health of the family is purely under the jurisdiction of women in an African society.
We have over the years promoted the empowerment of women. Mm-hmm. It's more active probably in the past 30 years in this country.
Yeah.
We've seen all sorts of campaigns saying women must come first. You apply for a tender, there's a scoring that's very different for you if you're a guy compared to if you're a woman. What has that done for men in society, in your opinion?
Well, it's a good thing that women were being given special attention insofar as their empowerment. We agree as well as Controlesa that women were triply oppressed under the colonial and apartheid state. And therefore you needed to do that in order to bring women to the same level.
True.
Because the apartheid and colonial governments were brutally patriarchal. Where we are now, we can see clearly some achievements insofar as the empowerment of women. They are in leadership at a political level. They are in the legislature. They are in the judiciary. They are in the army.
And
business.
Yeah.
So they are there, and we say, bravo, we have done well insofar as that. But a lot still needs to be done.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, because mentally, there are still men who believe that women are subordinates. And this happens from the African society as well as the white communities. That women have not reached a particular level of IQ and therefore can't be given certain positions. It's wrong. It's nonsense. So we say the same. That's why I'm saying to you, we have always employed a policy approach as the institution of traditional leadership that women ought to play a role. If a woman has a capacity, must play a role. We know that Mkabai Kajama was the kingmaker in the Zulu kingdom. We know that even in the Xhosa communities, Queen Onesi, Untsusu, all of those ladies played a key leadership role in Nzanga, in Angola, and so on and so forth. Mujaji in Limpopo. So there is no issue for us. We think that it is a good thing. The only thing which is a problem is the gender violence against women. Yes, and femicide. And this is a product of coloniality and apartheid with the labor, the migrant labor system created some of these things because it disintegrated families and it created violence which has proven that it's been inherited. Yeah. So we need to do an element of education on that and push back on that type of violence.
And then maybe that's why the basis of my question was what has all of this done to men? Because they are the stronger one in this union.
Yes.
And I guess the reality of it is you see manifestations of these offshoots.
I once said, David, that there was a time when the campaign against the gender violence against women was at its was
at its peak.
Was at its peak.
Yeah.
But whilst it was at its peak, this thing was
never
continuing.
Stopped. It never went down.
Instead, it was escalating.
Yes.
Because what it did is that when we're pushing on this aggressive campaign against gender violence against women, women felt that society is rising to protect them. And they were feeling emboldened to speak out and to actually speak back. Also in a manner that they were also very bold.
True.
And some men could not take that. And hence there was an escalation.
Yeah.
Yes. So they would respond in the most vicious way, banning women, killing them ruthlessly, all of those things. These things are actually anti-African, un-African, and unacceptable. Yes.
Violence in rural areas
violence
seems to be escalating. Am I making the right observation?
Look, rural communities under the stewardship of traditional leadership have always been known as peaceful areas because there was order there.
True.
No stranger comes in any village without being registered. But things in the new dispensations have fell apart. People have abused democracy to a point where they have become irresponsible. Some powers and functions of traditional leadership and their structures were taken away. And that has created a gap in the system.
Okay.
To the extent that drugs are also flowing in the rural areas. And then this violence has also crept in, rape and so on. So it's a problem that we have. And that's why Condoleezza is calling for the powers, roles and functions to be reinstated so that the traditional authority in that area can, set the rules of each and every community. Yeah. At the moment, it's a problem.
It's free for all.
It's a free for all, and people do as they wish. And there's a much entrenchment of rugged individualism. The community and the community spirit in rural areas has always been a way of handling matters rather than individualism. So people have abused these individual rights to a point where in the issue that you raised on initiation we find ourselves even having the problems when it comes to issues of initiation. And by that, I'm referring to the rites of passage from boyhood to manhood.
True.
Where now all of a sudden children are dying, and yet this has never happened before the new dispensation. It's because people are abusing democracy. Democracy gives rights to people, but people forget that also democracy gives responsibility. You can't overemphasize the issue of rights at the expense of responsibility. So we are closing in because also we must talk about an African-focused form of democracy, which takes into account our communal system, our system of acting as a collective in society.
As we speak now, we hear almost every week now of mass murders and mass shootings
in rural areas.
And it happens more in rural areas than any other place in the country.
The irony is that these things never occurred in the rural areas.
No.
And
we used to run there for peace and quiet.
Even at night, there was no issue. And the rural areas have always been peaceful, even though the police stations are located in urban spaces.
True.
Right?
Very far from the community.
And they are still far. Now, people have realized that if we have access to guns, we can actually torment and torture a community because police are too far. And that's why people are doing these things.
But what is happening to the state of mind? Clearly, there's a deeper story to talk about here. Why suddenly there's so much of this type of violence in these neighborhoods? It can't just be an administrative issue. Surely there's something in the psychology of our people.
It is. It's a mental illness that I mentioned, which is caused by several issues that are related to the challenges of unemployment, inequality, problems of poverty that we have, but also the presence of drugs and the circulation of drugs in our community is also helping the situation.
What has happened? How did, in your observation, drugs make it to? Because,
like I say, if you have taken away the powers and functions from the institution of traditional leadership, who are you hoping that is going to maintain
law and order
in those communities? Because you are basically undermining that structure to a point where you are creating anarchy in the society.
Yeah.
So when there's anarchy in the society, people know that there's no leadership here. If it is there, it is more like ceremonial because the powers are taken away. It is only traditional leaders who have capacity and who have people who are willing to commit and volunteer to work with them to actually ensure that their communities are insulated from these social ills.
We spoke earlier about customary law and how it's still effective. We recognized that traditional leaders they hold a law and order, but clearly the practice of it is tricky. Even for people that are violent, that are stealing cattle and so forth and so forth and so forth. Are we also saying that traditional leaders do not recognize their own power? Because the law says they should recognize their own power.
They do, and where they can, they do. But my brother, in the case where traditional leaders don't get support, what do you hope they can do to fight against people who are carrying machine guns?
They can't say much.
Yes, they can't say much because they will also be shorted.
Yeah.
If there's extortions that are happening in the communities and traditional leaders try to confront the extortionists tend to shoot them.
Have we seen a rise in that?
There's been a rise in extortion. It has crept in the initiation period where children were being harassed and their parents were being harassed, where people were demanding money from the parents. And if they don't pay the protection fee of their children in the mountain, then their children may not come back.
So it's not even the old story we used to hear of children being kidnapped to go to the mountain.
No, it has now different mutations. That also happens. But this is another one now. Where they go to the initiation school and ask for your numbers and your address. And then they go to your home and then they say your child is there in the mountain. If you want him to come alive, give us 1,000 rand a week. Yeah. So this is what is happening. When we allow these things to happen, simply because the law enforcement agencies are not biting, then it is bound to escalate because people know that it makes them money and it gives them a quick buck.
Are we at a state where we are losing control of this? Because if it escalates, it means we will...
In certain sections of our society, we have lost control. And that's why we are saying, at least in the rural communities, allow the institution of traditional leadership to be empowered so that it can exact law and order in their spaces. And we must give them support in terms of resources.
And that means police force.
Let's come up with reservists, and let's also bring in police for those spaces that are rural. And they must be stationed at least if people know that there's police visibility and there are police stationed within their communities. This will lessen the level of criminality.
You've been advocating, and I'm not sure if I'm wrong. If I'm wrong, correct me, for a stop, and I'll use that phrase deliberately because it's easy language, of initiation schools for a while. Am I making the right observation? There's been headlines about that.
We said in the hotspots where there's a continuation of the death of children from one season to the other, in those hotspot areas, clearly there is a problem. Therefore, you need to declare a moratorium.
Mm-hmm.
But the moratorium must not be blanketized.
Okay.
Yeah, it mustn't say
everywhere
in the entire Eastern Cape province, stop initiation.
Mm-hmm.
There are areas where they are doing very well, the majority of areas. But when children die, even if they are 10, it's too much.
Even if it's one.
One is too much many, even
Yeah.
if it's one. So the ritual is not meant to kill children. The ritual is meant to prepare the children for a leadership role into the future.
Mm-hmm. But we seem to be getting different results.
We're getting different results, and particularly because of criminality that has crept in. People are seeing this practice as an opportunity to make money. So that's why they set up bogus initiation schools.
Okay.
And they lure children to go there, and they also kidnap children to go there, and then they demand monies from their parents. That's one part. The second part is that we do require a training, especially in so far as the new cohort of traditional surgeons, as well as nurses, so that they are capacitated to deal with issues of dehydration, of bleeding, and so on and so forth, so that they don't mistreat the initiates and tell them that they can't drink water. 70% of the body
needs
water.
water. Yes.
So when they do that, they kill the children, not by omission, by commission.
Sure.
Yeah.
And how far are you in advocating for a moratorium in certain sections?
No, we have done that. But over and above that, we as Contralesa, we are calling for the institutionalization and professionalization of the initiation schools in our country, so that they can be part and parcel of the annual performance plans, and therefore they need to be budgeted for. We need to cost each and every initiation season. We mustn't use or employ an ad hoc policy that we only plan on the eve of the initiation season. It should be an annual occurrence, and the president or even the institution of traditional leaders, the kings, must declare the initiation season well in advance. And let us actually take a decision as a country and say, initiation is a national ritual. And we must take it serious as such, and put resources and bring in all the requisite department, COGTA, police, health, and education, so that a child knows a year before he goes, and the preparation for that and the steps that must be followed by the family must be clearly communicated to prevent any death from happening. Because besides the death, other children lose their manhood as a result of the negligence and perhaps miseducation.
And in an environment where you're saying other schools must stop operating because of the prevalence of death, how do you police that then? How do you police that's actually happening?
That's why I'm saying that traditional authorities working together with the Department of COGTA, police, as well as education, you need visibility of police during the season, even for the mere safety
of
and
the
security
children.
of the children.
Yeah.
Yeah, because quite clearly now the thugs are able to enter the system. So you need to have a detachment that is sent, especially during that season, because you know that this is a season where thousands of boys are going to be going there. It's not happening. So we are saying it must happen.
Yes.
Police must not just come in and out. They must be stationed into the areas
during that season.
Yeah. And actually complete the season. And technology allows, we can have drones to monitor, to observe, to surveil what is happening. We need to take all of those things into account. I think it is cheaper. It is a low cost clamp down if we do it like that, rather than allow death to happen and then it costs us as a country to a point wherein we could be taken to the Hague for killing our children.
Have we gotten to a point where we are desensitized to these deaths because they happen so often?
Yes, some people take it as if it's like a sacrifice that maybe it happens and it's necessary for it to happen.
Can't be.
It can be. No, it's not allowed. So if people are desensitized, I think they are acting irresponsible. We have been asking the government to say the best way is to deal with the traditional initiation season in the same way that we deal with normal education.
And the same way we deal with traffic during festive season.
Absolutely. The same way. We plan it like that. We have budget around it. But we want it to be a proper African school where young men are prepared for leadership in society. And government needs to take that serious and take it as an advantage and put enough resources to ensure that those children actually get proper education there, but also all the needs of the schools, the initiation schools, are actually met with the right budget.
There's something else you're calling for, May 8th to be National Ancestors Day.
We are not calling for it. We have already declared it.
Okay.
Yes.
Tell me more.
We are going for the 4th year. In 2021, we started.
Okay.
We launched it in Mpumalanga, there by the Kruger National Park, in the area of Hoshima Tupa Mukwena, who is the president of Contralesa. We hosted traditional leaders from across the country, traditional healers, artists, creative geniuses, and we said all the spiritual diviners must come and be part of that. We actually launched it in a traditional way. We sacrificed 2 beasts, one on the 7th, one on the 8th, and we actually declared as an institution of traditional leadership, working with the National House of Traditional Leaders, working with the National Khoisan Council, all these leaders were there. We agreed that it is our responsibility to declare this date in order to honor our ancestors, to say their dreams, their goals that we have inherited, we must take them to the logical conclusion. And from time to time, we are taking a stand that we will intercede with them so that they can protect us, help to guide us, help to also to discipline us where we are going astray. So that has happened, and we have been doing it annually every 8th of May. So what we are saying that the day is already Ancestors Day. Now what we want it to be recognized.
Okay.
Not necessarily as a holiday, but as a recognized day. If it becomes a holiday, it will be a bonus. We would love that to happen because it's part of what we want our people to go back to who they are, so that they can then behave in a manner that reflects who they are.
Speaks to self-love and those issues.
Yes, and it reveals, it gives a revelation of how we should conduct ourselves in the public domain. So we don't want to romanticize the issue of making it a holiday, but want to emphasize the issue that it must be something that must be bigger than the Valentine's Day. You understand?
I got you. Yes. No, I understand 100%. And from a marketing and a lobbying point of view, you should fight for it to be a public holiday. It's like shooting for the stars.
Yes.
Because if you're likely to end up at the moon, which is far enough.
Yes. Certainly. That's what we are actually saying. That's what we are actually saying. But we live in a country where our people are very opinionated.
Of course.
And therefore we have to take everything into account. This Ancestors Day has received an overwhelming support from all the sections of our society. There has been just a few people who seemingly were opposed. And it's the same people who always thought that our ancestors are demons. They are still saying the same rubbish, which they said during the colonial period. So
they're saying it's either ancestors or God. Which one?
We have a biological relationship with our ancestors. In our blood flows their blood.
True.
Our bones are made by their bones. And you can't therefore insult us by saying our ancestors are demons. You are actually saying we are also demons in the waiting.
Because you're going to die. Wow. Do you know something that always comes up for me when it comes to traditions and all of that is that very divide between, sometimes depending on who you're talking to, people will say those are old beliefs and the new beliefs are very different. They are modern, they are Christian in nature and so forth and so forth. Is it something that you come across as Contralesa, where people are saying, but what you talk about is old school. It's not, we don't practice that anymore.
There are people who are miseducated, who say even traditional leaders are outdated.
And unnecessary.
Yeah, and in a democracy, you don't need, it's a waste of money to have them. We think that such people are miseducated and they have lost their consciousness, their African consciousness, so to say. But we don't want to be very hard to those people because we understand the background of being brainwashed by colonial education, Western and imperial education. So all we do is to take the trouble to sort of educate the people and conscientize them around these issues in a very constructive way. This, I think, is the right approach to deal with such suggested negative or negativity that is pointed at us as an institution.
Is it a strong cry? Is it a strong,
it's not
loud
strong.
voice?
It's not strong at all. You know why it is not strong? Our only hope for our people, they have realized that traditional leaders are actually leaders of the country. They are not leaders of the republic. And they separate between the leaders of the country and the leaders of the republic. So the disappointment which has happened at a political level, at least the majority of traditional leaders still have legitimacy and credibility in the eyes of the people. And they know that traditional leaders do not have subjects. They have got people. And traditional leaders, where they are, they live amongst people and they are servants of the people. And their homes are public homes. They are open 24/7.
Yes.
People don't need to make appointments to go and see them. And if a traditional leader owns a car, the car becomes a community vehicle. When a child is born or when a woman is pregnant, is needed to be rushed to labor, the car becomes an ambulance. When someone passes on, the car becomes a hearse. When another car breaks down, this one becomes a tow truck. So that's how the institution of traditional leadership works in Africa. It is an organ of people's power. Yeah.
Here's one that I want us to touch on, depending on your appetite for it. We are dealing with a king that's going through a divorce, a very public divorce for that matter, because his marriage was civil. And I remember when I was talking about this on the radio, I said, historically, we wouldn't even know about these things. They would be happening within the formation of the house, of the royal household. Those dynamics would happen and disappear into that.
True.
But now we're dealing with a dynamic that's very different. What has led to that?
I think it's an abuse of democracy again. It's an abuse of the system. People have seen that the Western courts are very good at undermining our own design of living. And our own people are betraying our own organs of people's power and subjecting them into
the modern,
the European,
Eurocentric,
the Eurocentric instruments.
Yes,
and that to me is not right. You are right that we never heard about this. These are dealt, and it is the same about the claims and disputes of traditional leadership. These disputes never really played out in the domain to the point that the other faction of the family would take the other to court and so on. So it's the same thing in respect of this. Unfortunate. And we have been saying as Contralesa, because things have come to where we are now, perhaps the country requires a specialized court of traditional affairs, which must look at resolving these matters in a manner that is restorative, in a manner that is more African, in a manner that is not cumbersome, that is going to create a public fanfare around them. And that type of court must not just have the judges that are trained through the Western form of judicial system, but it must include historians, heritage practitioners who understand traditional affairs function and so on, so that they become a bench that must take a decision based as well on the nuances of our culture. Because sometimes a bench of judges take a decision that annoys, that actually undermines now our own heritage, takes a decision that is anti-culture, right? They just take a cold-blooded decision, which begins to reverse our gains of the reinstatement and foregrounding of our culture. We define our genealogy, and this is not done to undermine women, because it also benefit both men and women. Umashabela, both your daughter and your son will be Mashabelas. If your daughter gets married to Mkiva, she doesn't lose her identity. Ufika be ngumashabela, even though engumolokazana wakuthi.
Yeah.
So some people are beginning to challenge that you, David, you can actually marry so-and-so and you have to change your surname into that lady. Now, I mean, we are collapsing our African culture.
Completely.
I don't think we must go to that extent, which I call vulgar transformation. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I guess it speaks to...
So this issue that you are raising about people taking family matters into court, royal matters into court, it's the vulgarization of our own organs of administration.
Doesn't it also question the strength of the cultural traditional leadership within our families, within our royal houses, as an example?
For me, it points out an issue of a betrayal by our own people.
Deliberate,
yes.
Yeah.
Because someone will come to you and say, go and challenge the thing, I'll get you a lawyer. Yes.
I know this is according to modern law, you can win this.
So this is self-destruction and self-hate when people undermine their own culture in that way, subjecting your culture to a foreign instrument. It's a betrayal. It's a complete betrayal. You can't justify it in any way.
But the foreign instrument has portrayed itself as superior and stronger.
Yeah, well, that's the nature of coloniality. It always thinks that it acts in the best interest of the savage. Yes.
The savage doesn't know what food to eat.
Which is a blue lie.
Yes.
Which is a blue lie that we are told to leave our staple food, and now we eat this food, which is causing us all these kind of diseases, including cancer.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow. It's when I saw this, and because it's an evolving story of the king, and I say, this is new.
Yeah, no, it's quite a very ugly scene, actually. I don't know why people would go to that extent of stooping so low.
You spoke earlier about the type of courts, and they will have historians and so forth.
Yes, I said we need a specialized court so that our institutions are not subjected to a Roman Dutch law to decide on a traditional affairs matter. Or on a customary issue which relates to our culture. Because these courts can't have that audacity.
They don't have the insight.
Yes, they don't have the actual insight and nitty-gritty, including modality of dealing with that.
Here's something that I worry about in that approach, and it's a small but important detail. How much work are we doing to empower our historians, in inverted commas, our experts, those that are cultural experts, those who continue to know the practices? Because as time will have it, people will pass away and they will not exist forever. And how much work are we doing to continue to have our Prince Zolani Mkiva who exist within different communities? You can't be called to every meeting. You can't be called to every scenario that requires someone that understands these things. We are moving to the towns now, slightly 4 ways.
Yeah.
We really don't know. We have to call someone who knows someone. What do we do?
Very little has been done, David. There's a lot that needs to be done in that respect. For me, I even have a dream that we should have an independent school or schools for each province that does this kind of work, where you build a detachment of people who understand the institution of traditional leaders. Others focus on the law, others focus on the rituals, others focus on the history, and so on and so forth. Protocol and so on. You need such.
Like global, it's a basic thing.
All of those
but
things.
We need to understand how it's done.
We need someone who knows all the steps that must be followed.
And who will tell you this is how the Zulu people do it. This is how the Xhosa people do it. When you marry Xhosa, Zulu, this is where there's a different practice, and that's how you apply it.
Yeah. We need such a school, and of course we discussed that. The issue with these things is that they require access to finance. And access to finance is always a problem. But we hope that as an organization, it's something that we will be able to achieve. If we can't achieve it as an organization, perhaps there will be patriots and compatriots who will be able to come up with an initiative like this and establish it in the country. But it is something that is required. I was actually talking to one advocate. I think it's Advocate Sonwabile Mangcwatshwa. I was saying, because he's going back to practice, I was saying to him how I wish he can focus on customary law and become an expert of that, so that he becomes distinguished in that field. I know that he knows and is very passionate about that, so that he becomes a distinguished advocate of the court who specializes on customary law and restorative justice, including being a chief mediation officer when families like this are fighting, so that you don't just go to court. Sometimes you approach both parties and say, perhaps you can coordinate this and be a chief mediation officer. So you need that approach. Yeah.
Sure. We need a lot of things.
We need a lot of things to change the trajectory of our country.
My worry is, yes, controllers there, it exists, but we don't have political champions that are conscious, that are bothered by these things on a daily basis, who, when they wake up in the morning, they know they're going to try to solve that small problem that forms within the traditional ambit of their work. And that, for me, is by far our biggest worry.
Yeah, and it may compel that we can't think of ourselves as being apolitical when a country is not yet totally.
So it forces you to be political.
It forces us to consider, to be political. It also forces us to actually go political. Yes, so that we go and fight for what needs to happen at a level where it is doable.
Is it possible Controlesa will be a political party?
No. I don't think it would be good for Controlesa to be a political party. That's my personal opinion. I think Controlesa is all right as a vanguard of the institution of traditional leadership, because in that way, Controlesa is free to engage with government, and it is given and accorded a respect of what it stands for. And it actually has a position to represent, to be represented, even in government structures that are critical. But if you can reduce yourself to a political party, you will be treated like rest. You will no longer be able to have the privilege of engaging with the Minister of Culture, with the Minister of Social Development, Education, and so on. We do take part in all of those platforms. So we will reduce
yourselves to an opposition.
To opposition. Yes. And in that way, we may no longer be effective. But other colleagues may think differently. But I think, for me, it's a well-considered view that it would not be advisable that we challenge the political office as ourselves, as Controlesa. We rather take some of our people to contest elections through other formations or as independent. Then in that way, they can still account to us.
True.
Yes.
The issue of rural development, it's something that is spoken about more often than not, you hear it almost in passing, or when there's some bridge that has to be built between one town and another, and that bridge happens to be in a rural area. Do you feel there's enough work? And this I make as a concluding statement from you. Do you feel there's enough work when it comes to rural development issues in South Africa currently in relation to what your efforts are and what your objectives are as Contralesa?
You know, you will be surprised if I tell you that the bulk of money that could have been used to deal with infrastructural development of the rural areas is the amount of money which has been used on the bailouts of the public enterprises.
What?
The state-owned enterprises.
Yes. When they are having problems financially.
Yes. I discovered this in the past few years. That was the amount of money, and actually it was confirmed by the DG of the Treasury. But we stopped it.
That's in billions.
It's billions, because we could bail out one entity like SAA with 10 billion. We'll bail out in 3 years an entity like ESCOM with 30 billion, and SABC, and so on and so forth.
Post office, there's so many.
So that's what I want to start off, that we have lost an opportunity to invest those billions in the rural landscape. But also, the Department of Rural Development came into being in 2009. And it is a product of our struggles as Contralesa. This Department of Rural Development, together with the Department of Traditional Affairs, we fought, we convinced the ANC to establish these departments. They did. With rural development, it has got budget. With Traditional Affairs, it doesn't have budget to date. It only has a budget for the wage bill of those workers.
Administration.
Yes.
Yeah.
But this one has a budget. But unfortunately, the budget has been dealt with in this manner. But now, we think we are turning the corner. We have managed to stop that money being used differently. Of course, it has been a piecemeal fashion how the department was dealing with issue of rural development. As you say, they would build a bridge here and there. We have convinced government that this needs to be focused, and the offices of rural development can't be in Pretoria. You can't use a helicopter approach to deal with issues in the rural areas. You need to be in the cold, front of where the communities are. And we are making the offices of traditional authorities available as satellite offices for rural development, so that the work is right in the cold front.
What does rural development look like? Yeah, what does rural development look like for you? Pick a community that you're familiar with and say, this is actually what should be happening.
Well, the rural, there should be proper roads, whether they are paved or tarred. That's rural development. There should be running water. There should be public toilets. There should be reliable electricity. There should be proper network signal. There should be schools that are of the same quality and standard as those in the urban areas. There should be clinics that do not run short of medicine.
And doctors.
And there should be doctors right there who are not visiting but who are stationed there. But there should also be deliberately universities that are located there. So that like Forte, the university that is almost semi in a rural area. There should be more.
Yes.
So all of those point to what I started talking about, that we are seeking to have smart villages that must be villages of hope, so that we turn around the fortunes of the people who live in the rural areas from being referred as people who live in dead economic spaces. Yes, but those spaces must be transformed into spaces of economic activity. And that will reduce the pressure from the cities. That will deal with the issue of the sporadic shanty towns and amatyotyombe that have made our towns to look so ugly because of this. So we will be able to attract investment once we have such infrastructure in the rural areas. We can now have investors coming to establish industries, factories right there. But we also support what do you call it, the subsistence farmers. Remember that we have thousands and thousands of livestock, cattle, sheep, and goats.
Yeah.
How do we help the people in the rural who are subsistence farmers to transform into semi-commercial farmers? Right now, we don't even have veterinaries and taxidermies in the rural areas. It means that every weekend when we slaughter for a funeral or a wedding and so on, thousands we slaughter every weekend. We are throwing away those hides and skins.
Sure.
And yet we could be using them as a... So we need finance. We need a financial injection deliberately from the Department of Rural Development to set up. You can start with one tinnery and taxidermy for each province.
You said there is some budget. Is there budget for such projects?
There is a budget.
Does it really sit within rural development, or shouldn't it be redirected somewhere else?
No, it's okay with rural development.
Yeah.
But what you need is a strategic plan.
Okay.
Yes. And that strategic plan must not be decided only by bureaucrats who sit in Pretoria. They need to sit around the table with all the stakeholders in the rural areas, including traditional leaders, including subsistence farmers who are there. We sit together, we develop a strategic plan for rural development in the country.
And I was saying the point about budget allocated, it sounds like public works issues, most of those things. It's with the construction of schools and construction of universities and so forth and so forth and so forth. It sounds like it becomes such a complicated thing. But you're saying it's better when it's organized in one place.
Public works will still play its role. But the basic infrastructure
and strategy.
Yes, yeah. It needs to be done by the Department of Rural Development as a line function department. Other departments will give support.
Yeah.
Yes. Schools will still be under the same jurisdiction.
Of course.
But I'm saying the quality of schools and the deployment of teachers in those schools should be something that must be looked at, because at the moment, when you compare the rural schools to the urban schools, from a point of view of infrastructure, you still have disparities.
We're still dealing
need to close the lines.
with toilets, with pit toilets.
We need,
in some
yes,
parts.
those are the things I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah. So the Department of Rural Development can still coordinate other departments. Anyway, as Controlesa, we are encouraging that the state departments must not work in silos.
Of course.
But the line function department must bring others on board to do their lot.
If you had to give a mark out of 10, 10 being excellent, how has Rural Development Department done in regards to things that you mentioned?
Yeah, well, I would give it 5 to 10.
That's not good, though.
It's not good at all. It may be less. Maybe I'm being generous when I say 5 to 10. Yes, but I think it needs to do more, and we're hopeful that in this 7th administration they will do more.
Well, Mkiva, I totally appreciate the time you've given me.
Pleasure is all mine, David. Thank you for having me.
I did say to you that we'll touch on everything, or
yes,
as much as we can.
Yes, I know. Yes, yeah. Thank you for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity you gave to me, but also the appreciation that you gave to Controlesa as an organization.
Yeah,
we're looking forward to this, that it will have the right impact in terms of educating our people on what we stand for and what we are about, so that they can know that traditional leaders are selfless. They are not self-serving. They are about advancing, the livelihood of the people and to better their lives and to ensure that the rural areas are actually brought into the fore to a point where they also work professionally, ethically, and provide opportunities for our young people.
That's
and
true.
women. Yes.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Pleasure, my brother.
Thank
you. Welcome.
Epitori batho senganga. Thank you so much.
No,
yes, wow.
Thanks,
I found that very insightful. Thank you.
King David Studio Podcast.